The questions presented by this impeachment inquiry are whether President Trump sought to exploit that ally's vulnerability and invite Ukraine's interference in our elections.
What we will witness today is a televised theatrical performance staged by the Democrats.
Ambassador Sondland told President Trump the Ukrainians were ready to move forward. Following the call with President Trump, the member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden, which Giuliani was pressing for.
Over the course of 2018 and 2019, I became increasingly aware of an effort by Rudy Giuliani and others, including his associates Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, to run a campaign to smear Ambassador Yovanovitch and other officials at the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv.
Ambassador Yovanovitch, as we sit here testifying, the President is attacking you on Twitter, and I'd like to give you a chance to respond. I'll read part of one of his tweets. Everywhere Marie Yovanovitch went turned bad. She started off in Somalia. How did that go? He goes on to say, later in the tweet, is a U.S. president's absolute right to appoint ambassadors.
I don't think I have such powers, not in Mogadishu, Somalia, and not in other places. I actually think that where I've served over the years, I and others have demonstrably made things better. I mean, I can't speak to what the president is trying to do, but I think the effect is to be intimidating.
Welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our live broadcast, and others of you are joining us on Facebook Live and Twitter. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. Tonight, the impeachment hearings. 2 days of public testimony in the House impeachment hearings this week featured veteran career diplomats and a high-ranking State Department employee. Democrats and Republicans on the Intelligence Committee questioned the three about their knowledge of President Trump's phone call during which he pressured the president of Ukraine into investigating 2020 presidential rival Joe Biden in exchange for military aid. A national poll before the hearings revealed an almost even partisan divide. Did this week's hearings change that? And will the long-term impact help the president's re-election effort or boost the chances of a Democrat candidate winning back the White House? Joining me tonight, Philip Martin, senior investigative reporter, WGBH News. Marcus Walker, a humanities and history teacher at Fenway High School. He also teaches at Harvard University. Professor Paul Watanabe, professor of political science and director of the Institute for Asian American Studies at UMass Boston, and Yvonne Espinoza Madrigal, executive director of the Lawyers for Civil Rights. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to start this way. I want you, from each of your own career perspectives, if you will, tell me the thing that stuck out for you in the hearings that you think makes a difference. So I'll start with you, Paul.
Well, I think prior to this beginning of these open hearings, a lot of people say, does it make any difference what's going on, the misuse of power? And the thing that's clear to me is, in the clearest way possible, every day that Donald Trump is in office, it matters. It matters to people who care about economic and racial and social justice. It matters to people who care about the environment. It matters to people who want health care. It matters for people who want a foreign policy that is sane and consistent. So sure, it matters. Every day that this guy is in office, it matters. And that's what's really at stake here in some regard.
All right, so that's Paul Watanabe. He's got a political perspective. Yvonne, a civil rights perspective.
One of the things that has really been in my mind are the racial dimensions of the polls. Over 80% of African Americans support the impeachment process. And I think that's a really remarkable figure in and of itself. And just a little bit over half of Latinos, at about 57%, support the impeachment process as well. So I think the polls often don't focus on these communities and their perspectives. So I think it is important for us to talk about how this is being received in communities of color and how they're going to feel about this, how this is going to impact the 2020 election, because these are key constituencies that are going to be activated for the election.
From a journalist perspective, Philip.
It was important for the chairman, Adam Schiff, in this case, to tell a story, to build a case, an investigation, if you will. And I think that they succeeded this week with the witnesses they had, Taylor, and especially Ambassador Yovanovitch, in trying to basically create a narrative of what happened, and it conveyed to the American people the import, the significance of what happened. Because without that storytelling, it becomes very difficult for Americans to sift through, like the particulars of this particular investigation, which is what it is. And so I think what she brought to this in particular was a human story. The notion of being called in the middle of the night, 1 a.m., as a friend of yours is dying, suffering. I don't know if you heard the entire
This is Ambassador Yovanovitch.
That's right,
yes.
Ambassador Yovanovitch. And in telling that story, they basically conveyed to the American people why this is important. Because what's at stake here is not just a question of a presidential prerogative to choose who can be an ambassador, but the notion, of a out-and-out blatant attempt to turn foreign aid a foreign aid situation into one in which it advantages you politically. And I think she helped do that. Taylor helped do that. And I think the argument that the Democrats particularly have made, because they have no other support on this. The Republicans have not chipped in at all to basically on the side of truth. And I think that that this has been important and successful in that regard.
Okay. So, Marcus Walker, you're in the classroom. Mm-hmm. What, from your perspective as a teacher and from what you're hearing from your students, is the thing to focus on? Because presumably all of us on this panel know something about it, probably know a little bit more than most people who are not paying as close attention. That'd be different in your classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find myself that it's kind of, I have to talk about it on two different fronts. My students are incredibly intelligent and savvy, but they may not, just as you say, going through the particulars and sifting through that's kind of the second front I have to go through. When shortly after the whistleblower came out about the July 25th phone call, I covered it with my students, and the feeling, I teach at a school that's probably about 95% black and brown, and about 60% Latinx. So among the student body, they already kind of carry this natural antipathy towards Donald Trump because of his racist policies and so on. So they get that, but then, working with them and talking to them, sifting through the particulars. And I think most important is just this fundamental idea of a president holding up military aid, which is in the interest of the United States in order to benefit himself politically. Getting them, once I just made that statement, and once they saw the evidence there, automatically my students were like, well, that's not right. That shouldn't be.
Well, the thing is, in the past, the way people have seen these impeachment hearings, we should mention that there have only been 3. And so the attention during Watergate, for example, to the Clinton was high interest, very few media outlets, which is a whole different landscape now. So the latest from Nielsen is, and they don't have it for today's hearings, Friday, but after the first, there were 13.8 million people watching, which is a lot, but far less than the 20 million who watched the Kavanaugh hearings. So I don't know how to read that quite yet. And what I would also say is that probably what is happening, in fact, I know that's what's happening, people see a little bit of it in real time, but then they go to where they would get their news,
That's right.
and then they'll get pieces of it. And that is where the partisan divide is enhanced, because wherever you go to get it, it's going to be framed in a way.
You're absolutely right. I remember the Nixon Watergate hearings. I remember watching it. And even though I was young, I remember sort of figuring out for myself that you didn't have all of the talking heads, and you certainly didn't have the political news channels that you have now. And now people are going to get it filtered for them. Fewer are going to watch it directly. And it's going to be Fox News's spin on things, or CNN's or MSNBC's. And that's unfortunate because it's predictable what the spins are going to be. And the power, for example, of Fox News to be really define it's the #1 source of information for most of the the largest source of American people. And I wish people like Marcus's students, I hope you're telling them to watch it themselves and come to arrive at some conclusions based on the intelligence that they have. And I wish American people would be as smart as Marcus is trying to have his students watch this.
Yeah. It's the point that you made about the #1 Fox program in the news drawing more viewers is correct. MSNBC came in second. Still big numbers, but you have a sense of where that's going. Yvonne?
I think there's also a sense of exhaustion. Every day in the news, there is new political developments about Trump, and there is almost a sense of exhaustion in terms of this is yet another development that we are going through. So I do fear that some of it gets lost in the current climate, because when you speak to people and you say, well, there are improprieties that the president is being held accountable on, people are like, well, more improprieties? Like, this has been happening since day one. So that's what I mean by this sense of exhaustion that people might have, which I think is combined with this politicized tendency that you guys are talking about, which I think it's the confluence of both of these things that are affecting the viewership and also the way people are reacting to it. I've talked to a lot of folks, our community partners, people on the ground about, how do you feel about this impeachment proceedings? And I see that palpable sense of exhaustion.
So that's a very important point now, because how do you get across a sense of urgency about what the people who, some of the Democrats and some Republicans saying, this is damage to our country. This is not damage to the president. This is not personal to us. It may seem like to supporters that it is, but it's really about a larger issue.
I think in some ways that is coming across. I agree with Yvonne that there is a sense of exhaustion, but I think there's also a sense of wonderment in trying to understand what exactly is going on. And speaking of confluence, a confluence of events occurred this week, which basically puts into focus the notion of an imperial presidency. And let's start, for example, with the decision by the appellate court in New York to basically say, yeah, Donald Trump, your taxes can be looked at. But we're going to we know the president's going to take this to the Supreme Court, which indeed he has. Now, the question becomes, if the president takes this to the Supreme Court and is relying on the Supreme Court to basically affirm his presidency, and the Supreme Court actually affirms that the executive prerogative to essentially do whatever you want, including to hide your taxes, then what you are stuck with, in fact, is an affront to democracy itself. And this is what people are dealing with right now. When they look at...
but are they? See, that's my question.
Well, I think some people are.
Yeah.
I think you have some people, I've had this discussion with folks who are really concerned about what exactly is happening to the America they knew or thought they knew. In theory, I mean, we've always had these contradictions, which have been enormous. But all of a sudden, they're seeing the possibility that the Supreme Court might side might basically come down on the side of an imperial presidency, an impeachment situation in which the White House ignores subpoenas, a situation where you find defense.
The president is kind of untouchable.
Right, the
Yes.
defense of the
Yes.
president, no
Yeah.
matter what he
Yes.
does, and the notion that this guy's untouchable. For people, folks who have grown up in this concept of America, not just the real America, but the concept of America, like being a place where democracy is something that is unbreachable. All of a sudden, you see the possibility of authoritarianism.
Okay, but
and I've had that discussion with people who are, in fact, for the first time, I've in these discussions with folks, are actually concerned about that.
So Marcus and anybody else can jump into this. My thing is, I'm not sure that everybody sits around and discusses democracy in the terms that we're discussing it now. So what does democracy look like on the ground, and what do students understand they will lose or gain based on damage to the Constitution?
Yeah,
See, that's what I don't know if that's going through.
Yeah, that's a great question. And as a teacher, I have to walk a careful line. I would imagine that there's some viewers, you know, that are automatically thinking I'm some type of ideologue that's preaching, you know, supporting one party over another. The thing that I have to kind of think about and battle the most, and I think which is really dangerous right now, and I don't know if this has always been going on, but we've kind of lost this sense of being able to say that something is right and something is wrong. Right. Everything is always political. You can have a president, this is not the first time that this president has broken the law. This is not, and it won't be the last time that the president has been racist and attacking people, but we still kind of have to have a debate. I don't think we should be having a debate about whether or not the president, again, should hold up military aid to another country. And as soon as we start to open up this debate, I worry that it clouds, and it does cloud the view of my students. Because then I think, you know, young people are taught that debate is a wonderful thing. We should, you know, look at two sides of an issue. But sometimes there aren't two sides. And it's at our peril that we continue to politicize and turn everything into a debate. We have to stand up at one point and say, this is wrong.
You know, Marcus, I think you're so right. You know, there's the never Trumpers, and he's right about that. But there's always the always Trumpers, forever Trumpers. And there is a core of people out there who are trying to assess the situation. And I agree very clearly. I don't think they're sitting there worrying about whether democracy at stake or whether the Constitution at stake, but they can see corruption. And I think, and let's call it what it is, it's corruption. The plain talk that you talk about is absolutely right. You know, when Renee Graham wrote that piece that says problematic is one of the, it's the word we always use. It says, no, there's nothing problematic about it. It's corruption. You know, there's nothing problematic about Donald Trump's attitudes towards people of color. It's racist. Let's not just say it's problematic. And what I think this thing people reveals to people, fair-minded people, they simply say, I don't know whether the Constitution is a peril, but I know that this is corruption. It's corruption if I try to do this with my friend and try to ask for a favor and say you have to do something for me before I do something that is my interest, not the community's interest, not the group's interest, my interest. And I think people can understand that. And to the extent that that comes through in these hearings and these discussions, I think they will have moved the ball forward.
I want to pick up on the thread that was being developed about what happened in the Court of Appeals in the Second Circuit in New York, which was particularly telling that the president's lawyers were saying, literally, the phrase was, a temporary presidential immunity for the extent of the presidency. And there were hypotheticals that were posed by the court, including references that the president has made about being able to get away with shooting someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue. And that was asked to the lawyer, what's your position on that? Does temporary presidential immunity apply to that situation? And the lawyer said yes. And that is what's deeply...
That's an always Trump.
Wow.
But that's...
Well, that was in a court of law.
That's the legal position. That's the legal argument, is that there is this extensive immunity. And so when you start looking at it from that perspective, if that's what they believe applies, of course they think they could get away with a bribe to Ukraine, because if he can get away with shooting a human being on the street and not being held accountable for it, then why shouldn't he, get away with other things? So I think this concept of immunity is very much what the White House operates under, and they think that they're above the law. And I think the importance of the hearings and having Americans talk about this is precisely because this is the way we protect our democracy and we stop the politicization of our institutions. Right now, I feel like in the country, it's so much about party as opposed to institutions.
Institutions.
Yeah,
Exactly.
well, I think you're absolutely right about that, but I worry that that's the filter, because A lot of conversation has been by people who say, yes, that phone call was problematic. Yes, but I don't know that it was corruption.
Right.
I'm not sure it's impeachable. Can't we just chalk it up to that was a kind of messed up,
Well, here's
you
where
know,
it becomes
phone call?
absolute. Today, as we all know, Roger Stone was convicted of obstruction. And
Roger Stone worked for President Trump.
That's right,
Yeah.
and basically worked to he lied about serving as basically an intermediary with help from others to WikiLeaks and basically taking that information and funneling it to President Trump. He lied in order to protect the president. And what he said, according to prosecutors, was that no one would care that he lied. In talking to someone else, and that's the bottom line. And he said no one cared, but also, this is telling. This week, despite a judge telling him not to, he went to InfoWars, Alex Jones' conspiracy.
Who he went
the conspiracy theorist, right-wing
No,
conspiracy.
you said he went to InfoWars.
Oh, I'm sorry. Stone went to
Stone.
Yes,
Roger Stone
yes,
and basically
yeah.
on InfoWars basically made an appeal to the president for a pardon. He said, I know I'm going to be convicted. And he was in advance asking for pardon. That's what we're dealing with right now. The notion that you can do something and you can do it illegally and expect to be exculpated by the president. Now the president expects that to happen in Congress through the help of Republican surrogates in Congress. He expects that to happen in the courts, the Supreme Court. He's relying on the Supreme Court to basically give him a clear path with the tax situation.
Yeah.
And Roger Stone and those who basically are Trump forevers, Trump followers, believe that it's not just a question of exculpation in the court of public opinion, but actual exculpation by this president, a pardon. And that's what we're dealing with. It's a
intense.
very different type of situation.
So what do you tell if you're studying democracy and you're studying the Constitution and you're studying the founders and what all these rules mean, what do you tell your students in the face of listening to some of these arguments?
I mean, I actually really enjoy teaching the Constitution, getting students to actually read that primary source and understand, what the different rules are for the branches. But with this, again, it's even with my students understanding the Constitution, just the amount of noise that's out there, and then like you were saying before, the feelings of exhaustion. I also have students that also refuse to be exhausted by this as well. So there's only a threshold of only so much they're going to take before they're just going to start to tune it out. So I have to be clear and savvy on when I have to pick my moments to actually talk about the impeachment process. It's not something we talk about on a daily basis because it would just wear them out.
Yeah.
But key moments when it happens is when I kind of interject and try to get them to refocus.
But do they see it
and
as
really
part
think
of their
about
lives? I guess I don't think a lot of people see it as part of their lives.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful question, and that's something I think about deeply. As those students growing up in Boston. I often think that the local aspect, what's happening locally with them in their community, I really want them to be paying attention to those things for sure. But at the same time, I every single day, I really try to tell them, listen, I want you to do big things. Don't just sit here and say, oh, politics, no, I want you to do big things. You can. I hold up people like Ayanna Pressley and other young folks that are standing up and really making a difference, and I say, I want you to do it too.
That's why these hearings have shown me that democracy and government is not text, it's not documents and so forth, it's people. And here you have a clear contrast. You got the Rudy Giuliani's, you got the Jim Jordans or whatever the guy's name is.
Jim Jordan is on the Republican.
You got the Roger Stones.
congressperson.
That's one team. That's one group of people. And then you have solid people like Kent and Taylor and Yanovich and other people who are really trying to. And so Americans, I hope, can see that. Which team do you want to have lead you? Which team do you want to have represent you and your country and the people that you and the values that you stand for? That's the choice. That's what democracy is about. That's what a country is about. It's not what document is more powerful or who has the biggest office or, the biggest limousine. It's who's the people who are really going to be the guardians, and that's what I think these things are going to show. Do you want Rudy Giuliani to the future of your children and your family and your neighbors to be in his hands?
The president's lawyer.
Or do you want it to be in the Yanoviches and the Kents and the Taylors? I think this is what we're sort of seeing played out here.
Yeah, and I think it's about making sure that we have the appropriate checks and balances.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's ultimately at the heart of this.
I know, but that's been undermined. And I try to remind people that all of the people who are testifying now in their career roles were either appointed by or approved by the current president. So they didn't come into the role to oppose the president.
Yeah.
They did not.
Yeah,
you
these
know,
are executive branch
these
people.
are people who are saying, I came in to work for you to support the country, and this is what has happened. That's what I think is getting overlooked in that. So anyway, more to discuss. This is the end of our broadcast right now, the end of our show. And thank all of you for joining me. Stay with us right now as we continue our conversation on Facebook Live and Twitter. Did the needle move at all with that partisan divide? And what about Deval Patrick entering the presidential race? Thanks so much. Good night.